After the end of Better Call Saul, the writers said they would not make any more shows or movies in the Breaking Bad universe, at least for the time being. Personally, like many viewers, I would love to see more, even if what we got already is insanely good. So I've been thinking about potential spin-offs for a long time, and got to the conclusion that the one I am craving the most is one that tells the origin story of Gustavo Fring. Not just because he is my favorite character, but because the writers gave us hints in both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul that there is a story worth telling there. And since we probably won't see it happening, why not making my own fanfiction? I called it El Chileno, and yes, when I did I totally forgot about El Camino. At first, I was thinking about making just a video, throw in their ideas I had and call it a day. But the more I was thinking about it, and the more I was adding details, a structure for the story built up in my mind, characters were born, and I started associating faces with them. By the time I was halfway through with the video, I had more or less a rough story and almost 10 characters. So I decided to go back and do this thing properly, and divide it into 4 videos. This one, which is the introduction, in which I will cover some basic info, and then 3 chapters. Each of them will be tied to one of the 3 locations I envisioned as the setting for the story: Chile, Mexico, and the US. I think the first important thing to clarify is that the story is not just fan service. It doesn't come from a place of adding something to the universe for the sake of it. Exploring the origins of Gus Fring is a way to expand the universe and add more context to the events of both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Reading through posts on Reddit, I noticed that many viewers had a radically different take on the character from mine. In most of the cases, he is considered simply a psycho, and I actually think that is a very simplistic reading of his actions and choices throughout the shows. Furthermore, I realized that some people are struggling to understand the scale of Gustavo's business and Walt's in comparison. Learning more about Gustavo Fring's journey from Chile to New Mexico would create a much more solid foundation for the whole Breaking Bad universe. Another thing I think is important to cover in this intro is the historical context in which part of the story of Gus takes place. For those who might not be familiar with the history of Latin America, in 1973, there was a military coup in Chile. The democratically elected president, Salvador Allende, was killed and the Chilean army took power. General Augusto Pinochet was appointed as the new president and started a regime that lasted until 1990. The Pinochet regime is quite a controversial topic because on one hand it was one of the most violent in repressing any form of dissent, but on the other hand it also managed to grow the Chilean economy. Furthermore, the military coup was part of a much bigger picture. Latin America was a key geographical area of influence contended by the US and the Soviet Union. The extreme poverty of a large part of the population in the south of the American continent created a fertile ground for Marxist ideologies to flourish. In 1959, the US lost control over Cuba. The revolution, led by Fidel Castro, had become a model to emulate for many socialist groups in South America, so it is easy to understand why the United States had interest in backing up the military coup to overturn a socialist government, like the one led by Salvador Allende. Of course, this topic is heavily politically charged, but I would like El Chileno to be consistent with the rest of the Breaking Bad universe. in being focused primarily on the characters and their personal stories, with the social, political, and financial context as a backdrop. Even a sensitive subject like this can be treated in a balanced way, like it was done in The Americans, a show set during the Cold War, which was bold enough to portray two Russian spies for what they were, two individuals who loved their family, loved their country, and decided to serve it, believing they were fighting for the right cause, not some generic bad guys like they usually are in American movies. I think that is the best approach to complex topics like the Cold War, trying to understand the reasons that move people to act in a certain way on both sides of the argument, regardless of what you personally think about the issue. So definitely don't expect this story to move too far away from Breaking Bad in terms of style, but there are obviously some considerable differences in the setting that will call for a slightly different approach. Both Chile and Mexico are radically different countries from the US, and the story will also develop through a much larger time frame, maybe not larger than Better Call Saul, since Gus and Jimmy were more or less the same age, but the time spent in flashbacks might be more this time around. Even though the United States are often seen as a world on their own, their history can't be disconnected from the history of the rest of the American continent, a continent that has a history of violence that spreads beyond borders. And I think that to fully understand the violence in the North, you need to learn about the violence in the South, because the two are very much tied to each other. Finally, I would ask you not to set your expectations too high. I have put a lot of effort into this project and I have done my best to keep consistency with the original stories. That said, don't expect to get a script for a new show or anything close to that. I have a rough story, some characters, and a few key points to share. And hopefully, that will open up a discussion, and maybe your inputs will make the story richer. That said, I am actually very excited to share this story with you.